Prosecutors say it was an execution. A man appeared in court today, charged with shooting and killing his wife at a Milwaukee motel. Our Bill Miston was there, as was the victim's family.
Lance White is charged with first-degree intentional homicide in the death of Alicia Machnik. As White walked into court today, Machnik's family cursed him out from the gallery. The 29-year-old Machnik was found in a room at the Port Motel near 97th and Appleton last week, shot in the head. Surveillance video showed White and Machnik checking into the motel a couple days before. And the day Machnik was found dead, video showed White leaving the room, and no one else was seen going in or out until Machnik was found. Filings say White later showed up to his mother's house looking disheveled and dirty. She drove him to St. Luke's, where he was later arrested by police. In an interview, filings say White said he and Machnik stayed in motels and were, quote, getting high together when she told him to shoot
a knock
her,
on a motel room door.
Because
no answer. A master key slides into the lock. The door swings open, and what's inside that room will leave an entire city speechless. A young woman, lying on the bed. A single bullet wound to her head. Gone. But here's the part that will stop you cold. The man accused of pulling that trigger claims he didn't do it out of rage. He didn't do it out of jealousy. He says she asked him to. And the spot she allegedly pointed to, the exact place on her face where his name was tattooed. Was this a murder? A desperate cry for help that went too far? Or is Lance White's story nothing more than a cold-blooded killer's excuse? By the end of this video, you'll have all the facts, and you can decide for yourself. But before we get into it, drop a comment right now. What state or country are you watching from? True crime fans are all over the world, and I genuinely want to know where you're tuning in from. Let's see how far this community reaches. Now, Alan, let's talk about Alicia Machnik, a 29-year-old mother of two, a sister, a daughter, and a woman whose final days inside a Milwaukee motel room hide a story far more complicated than any headline could ever capture. Alicia Renee Machnik was 29 years old. She lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in a city known for its tight-knit neighborhoods and working-class roots. She was a mother of two, and according to everyone who knew her, she had never been in trouble with the law. Not once. Commissioner Barry Phillips, who reviewed her case, made a point of saying it out loud in court. She'd never been in trouble in her life. That detail matters. Because in true crime, these victims are sometimes reduced to their worst moments. But Alicia wasn't defined by how she died. She was a real person, a young woman with children who depended on her, a family that loved her, and a life that, at some point, had real promise. Her sister, Morgan Rhea, was one of the first people to speak out after Alicia was found dead. While police were still piecing things together, Morgan took to social media and did something bold. She named the man she believed was responsible. She posted his name. She urged the public to look out for him. She wasn't waiting for anyone to act. She was fighting for her sister the only way she could in that moment. That tells you everything about the kind of family Alicia came from. People who show up. People who speak up. And when Lance White was finally arrested, Morgan posted again. This time, her words were raw and honest. She wrote, "He was arrested. I feel so much relief. But the damage is already done. My sister is gone forever, and even though he's in jail, I still will never get the closure." Those words hit differently when you understand the full story. Because Alicia's life didn't fall apart overnight. It happened slowly. One bad decision, one toxic relationship, one motel room at a time. But somewhere along the way, Alicia's life took a turn that would ultimately cost her everything. Now let's talk about the man at the center of this story, Lance Devin White. 29 years old, same age as Alicia, from the same world. But from the moment he entered her life, the people closest to her knew something was wrong. Alicia and Lance got married roughly 1 year before her death. 1 year. And that's all it took for the people who loved her to watch her change completely. Her own mother said it plainly. She spiraled out of control ever since. Not gradually, not quietly, ever since. Those 3 words from a mother about her own daughter are devastating. Because mothers don't say things like that lightly. That's a woman who watched helplessly as someone she raised, someone she loved, disappeared right in front of her eyes. And what did this marriage look like from the outside? Motel rooms, one after another. The couple had no stable home. They moved in and out of motels along Appleton Avenue on Milwaukee's northwest side. Not once, not twice. Repeatedly over several months. Their relationship, by Lance White's own admission, it had reached a point where the two of them were simply, and I'm quoting him directly here, getting high together. That was it. That was the marriage. No stability, no future. Just 4 walls, a motel bed, and whatever substance kept the outside world from creeping in. But there's one more detail about Lance White that you need to know, and it's the kind of detail that's hard to forget once you hear it. Lance White had Alicia Machnik's name tattooed on his face. And Alicia, she had his name tattooed on hers. At some point, that tattoo stopped being a symbol of love. It became something else entirely. To understand what happened to Alicia Machnik, you have to understand the world she was living in during her final months. It wasn't a home. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a rotating door of motel rooms along Appleton Avenue in Milwaukee. Week after week, room after room. The same stretch of road, the same 4 walls, just a different room number each time. She and Lance weren't building a life together. They were hiding from one. And the drugs were a constant. This wasn't a one-time thing or an occasional bad night. By Lance White's own words, their entire relationship had become about getting high. That was the foundation. That was the routine. Wake up, get high, stay in the room, repeat. But here's where Alicia's story gets even more complicated. Lance White wasn't the only man in her life. There was another man. Someone she had been on and off with for 5 years. His name has never been made public, but what we do know is this. He was still very much involved. He regularly sent Alicia money. He knew she was living in motels. He even had access to her Uber account. Think about that for a second. A 5-year relationship. Still sending money, still connected. All while she was married to someone else and living in a motel. Alicia was caught between worlds, and none of them were safe. But the most chilling presence in her life wasn't even physically there. Somewhere behind prison walls, the father of one of Alicia's children was counting down the days to his release. According to Lance White, Alicia was terrified of this man. White claimed she told him that this man, once free, was going to come after both of them. That he had made his intentions clear, that his release, just 11 months away, felt less like a countdown and more like a death sentence. Now, whether that fear was real, exaggerated, or something White used to justify what came next, we don't know for certain. But what we do know is that Alicia was afraid, deeply afraid. She was married to a man who offered no stability. She was financially tied to another man she couldn't fully leave, and she was living in fear of a third man she couldn't escape. By January 2026, Alicia Machnik was a woman surrounded by people and completely alone. January 12th, 2026. Alicia Machnik and Lance White walked into the Port Motel on Appleton Avenue and checked in together. This wasn't their first time here. Records show the couple had stayed at this same motel multiple times over the past several months. The staff knew their faces. The routine was familiar. They took their room. They closed the door behind them. And for 2 days, nobody heard a word from either of them. Yeah, no routines that required them to step. No routines that required them to step outside and face the day. Just the two of them, inside that room, doing what they always did, getting high, waiting, existing. The motel walls weren't just four sides of a room. They were a world unto themselves. And for Alicia, those walls had become all she knew. Then came January 14th. That morning, at around 11:30 a.m., a motel employee walked down the hallway and knocked on their door. He needed to check on the room. Alicia answered, not by opening the door, but by speaking through it. She told him they would be staying another night. Her voice, her words. That was the last known contact anyone had with Alicia Machnik alive. 2 minutes earlier, at 11:28 a.m., something else had already happened. The motel's camera had captured Lance White walking out of that room, alone, no bags, no rush, just walking out. And after that, nobody entered that room, nobody left. The camera caught everything, and everything showed nothing but silence. 3 hours passed. 3 full hours where Alicia Machnik was behind that door, and the world just kept moving outside it. People checking in, people checking out, cars pulling in and out of the parking lot, life going on as normal. While inside that room, something had already gone terribly wrong. I want to pause here, because what happens next is where this case gets truly disturbing. But first, if you're finding this story as gripping as I am, hit that like button and subscribe right now. It genuinely helps this channel bring these important stories to light. Every like, every subscription, it all makes a difference. Now, back to that motel room door. At 2:38 p.m., the same motel employee walked back down that hallway. He knocked on the door. Nothing. He knocked again. Still nothing. He reached for the master key, slid it into the lock, and pushed the door open. What he found inside that room would stay with him forever. Alicia Machnik was lying on the bed, flat on her back. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't breathing. There was a single gunshot wound to her upper right forehead. The bullet had entered from the front and exited through the back of her head. Emergency services were called immediately. But there was nothing they could do. Alicia Renee Machnik, 29 years old, Died mother of 2, was pronounced dead at the scene. Now investigators began combing through the room, and what they found next raised immediate questions. Scattered inside that motel room were Lance White's personal documents, his state identification card, his birth certificate, his debit card, his social security card, all of it left behind. Think about that. A man leaves a room after a woman has been shot dead, and somehow leaves behind every single document that proves who he is. It was as if he wanted to be found. Investigators also recovered a single bullet casing and an intact bullet with what appeared to be blood on it. One shot. That was all it took. Meanwhile, miles away from that motel room, Morgan Rio was already on her phone. Before police had publicly named a suspect, before any charges were filed, Alicia's sister took to social media, posted Lance White's name, and urged anyone who saw him to contact authorities immediately. A sister refused to wait. A sister demanded justice, loudly, publicly, and without hesitation. And because of that, the clock on Lance White's freedom was already running out. Lance White left that motel room at 11:28 a.m. By 2:38 p.m., Alicia's body had been found. But White had already been moving, and he left a trail that investigators were able to follow almost immediately. Alicia's on and off boyfriend, the man who had been sending her money and had access to her Uber account, contacted police. He told them that someone had used Alicia's Uber account to take a ride from the Port Motel to another motel on Applebaum Avenue. The ride was taken roughly 1 hour after Alicia was killed. 1 hour. When he shot her, walked out, and ordered a ride on her phone. But his plan, and if you can even call it that, was already falling apart. When White arrived at the second motel, he walked up to the front desk and asked for a room. The employee looked at him and asked for identification. White had none. Remember, he had left every single piece of his identification back in that motel room with Alicia's body, his state ID, his birth certificate, his social security card, all of it, gone. He was turned away. With nowhere to go, White ended up at his mother's home. And the moment she saw him, she knew something was deeply wrong. She later told police that her son was acting completely out of character, as if he was under the influence of some sort of drugs. She took him to St. Luke's Hospital. That's where police found him. And that's where they arrested him, without a single struggle. No chase, no confrontation. Just a quiet arrest in a hospital, 2 days after Alicia Machnik was found dead in a motel room, less than a mile away. The contrast is hard to ignore. The violence he allegedly left behind in that room, and the stillness of the moment he was finally caught. Lance Devin White was in custody, and now it was time for him to talk. At St. Luke's Hospital, after being read his Miranda rights, Lance Devin White decided to talk. And what came out of his mouth was something nobody was fully prepared for. White confirmed that he and Alicia had been together for about a year. He confirmed they stayed in motels. He confirmed the drugs. None of that was a surprise at this point. But then he said something that stopped investigators cold. He claimed that on the morning of January 14th, Alicia came to him with a fear she couldn't shake. She told him that the father of one of her children was getting out of prison in 11 months. And she believed, without a doubt, that when that man walked free, he was going to kill them both. According to White, Alicia didn't want to wait for that to happen. He claimed she asked him to shoot her. Not in a moment of anger, not during a fight. He says she pointed to the exact spot on her face where his name was tattooed and told him to pull the trigger there. And he says he did. One shot to the head, right where she pointed. He told police that after he fired, he fled the room in complete shock. He left everything behind, his ID, his documents, his entire identity scattered across that motel room floor. He said he discarded the gun in a sewer near some apartment buildings not far from the motel. Now let's pause and think about this for a moment, because this is where you, as a viewer, need to ask some hard questions. If Alicia truly asked to die that morning, why did she speak to the motel employee just 2 minutes later and calmly confirm she was staying another night? That's not the behavior of someone who had just made peace with dying. And if Lance White was so consumed by shock, how did he manage to use her phone order an Uber, and attempt to check into another motel within the same hour. The evidence doesn't scream shock. It looks a lot more like someone trying to run. White's story raises more questions than it answers. And when this case goes to trial, those questions are going to matter enormously. When news broke that Lance White had been arrested, Morgan Rhea went back to her phone. This time, she wasn't sounding an alarm. She wasn't urging the public to look out for anyone. This time, she was just a sister, grieving, exhausted, and trying to make sense of something that makes no sense at all. She wrote, "He was arrested. I feel so much relief. But the damage is already done. My sister is gone forever, and even though he's in jail, I still will never get the closure." Read that again. Even with the arrest, even with the relief, no closure. Because closure doesn't bring Alicia back. Closure doesn't tuck her 2 children into bed at night. Closure doesn't answer the questions those kids will one day ask about their mother. 2 children, left without a mother at 29 years old. That is the reality that no court ruling, no conviction, and no sentence can ever fully address. Lance White made his first court appearance shortly after his arrest. The court set his bond at $300,000. He was charged with 1 count of first-degree intentional homicide, the most serious homicide charge under Wisconsin law. And in that courtroom, Commissioner Barry Phillips said something that cut straight to the heart of this entire case. He looked at what was in front of him, the charge, the victim, the circumstances, and he said plainly, she had never been in trouble in her life. A woman with no record, no history of violence, no run-ins with the law, gone at 29. Before we get to the closing, I want to take a moment, because every story like this one carries a lesson. And Alicia's story carries several. Domestic violence doesn't always happen in a house on a quiet street. Sometimes it happens in a motel room that nobody is paying attention to. Transient lifestyles, moving from room to room, cut off from family and community, can make it incredibly easy for dangerous situations to grow in the dark, away from anyone who might step in. Substance abuse makes everything worse. It clouds judgment. It traps people in relationships they would otherwise leave. It turns bad situations into deadly ones. But here's what this case also showed us. People can make a difference. Morgan Rhea posted on social media and helped bring a wanted man to justice. White's own mother recognized something was wrong and got him to a hospital. 2 ordinary people, 2 critical actions. Both mattered. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous relationship, please reach out. Here's the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day at 1-800-799-7233. If substance abuse is part of the picture, the Wisconsin Substance Abuse Helpline is reachable at 1-800-662-4357. You don't have to wait until it's too late. Alicia's story is proof of that. At the end of all of this, the motel rooms, the court documents, the confession, the charges, there is one thing that should never get lost. Alicia Renee Machnik was a real person. She was a mother, she was a sister, she was a daughter. She was 29 years old with 2 children who needed her. She had never been in trouble a day in her life. And she deserved so much better than the way her story ended. Whatever happened inside that Port Motel room on January 14th, 2026, one thing is not up for debate. A young woman lost her life. Ichik and the people who loved her will carry that loss forever. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Lance White's story? Do you think Alicia really asked him to do what he claims she did? Or do you think the truth is something he has yet to fully answer for? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This case is still making its way through the courts, and your perspective matters. If this story moved you, please share it. Not for the views, not for the algorithm, but because Alicia Machnik deserves to be remembered as more than a headline. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you in the next one.